My name is Eric Ola. I'm the Executive Vice Chairman of Finsurex Resources. We're based in London, Nigeria, Gambia, Canada, and the United States. Primarily, most of our projects are based in Nigeria, but we're expanding our platform to other parts of Africa. Our mindset is if we can overcome the Nigerian market and the challenges, then we're probably well positioned to act in any other market on the continent. Our primary resources that we focus on are battery metals, so at the stage manganese, lithium, cobalt, and associated metals. We're trying to work around ensuring that whatever minerals we go after have a demand in the market, because we tend to be looking at very early stage production. 2017 for us was a very interesting year. We learned a lot about the underpinnings and the opportunities in the sector, and specifically for Nigeria. We spent a lot of time investigating the market, and the results were quite favorable. And as a result of that, we actually set up Finsurex Resources as an individual entity and a subsidiary of our parent company. And 2017 has allowed us to move into our current situation where pretty much in production we've scaled up on our licensing assets. Pros and cons of operating in Nigeria are similar to those operating anywhere else in the world, and specifically for the continent of Africa. One of the disadvantages that most people find from the get-go is you don't really have a real structured environment in terms of infrastructure. A lot of the activities around the business, you have to build them from the ground up. Plus, in most cases, the standard business model where you find, say, you're looking for skill sets, capital, related expertise isn't readily available. But on the plus side, because it's a new space, it's a lot easier to get up and running. The typical mining cycle takes 5 to 8 years before you can actually see any reasonable production. From our experience, within 12 to 24 months, you pretty much can actually start producing and selling your product, and in which case you're cash flow positive. Aside from that, some of the other challenges are the fact that there's no real awareness in the global marketplace for what the real potential is. I always use the example of the fact that somewhere in Nigeria they're building a city 1/4 the size of Manhattan. It's a neighborhood Eco-Atlantic city. And for the most part, most of the world doesn't know anything about it. So in the absence of that awareness, it doesn't attract the same levels of investment and interest that one would expect. But we tend to see that as an opportunity, and we're early starters in the sector, and we'll continue to ride the wave through. Our business cycle right now, and since we started quite early, is to get the product out of the ground and sell as much as we possibly can, as quickly as possible, to get the business engines running and the cash flows we generate. In the medium to long term, though, we want to start processing some of that material locally, or at least in some form or fashion with some of our joint venture partners. So for 2018 specifically, it's really to start getting to a certain level of production where the company itself has some establishment, reaching out and expanding our relationships with off-takers, joint venture partners, looking at opportunities where we can push towards future processing and creation of products from that. Mining in itself is very intrusive. And in Nigeria, where you have communities who don't necessarily understand the business itself, they tend to see it as being abusive, and in that case, they tend to abuse the situation themselves. So it takes knowing how to communicate and relate to the different communities, because at the end of the day, it's a long-term venture, and the mindset in Nigeria is very tactical or short-term. The good side is we're learning as they're learning. So when we go into a community now, even at this stage, before we've even started production, we start to identify what some of the issues and challenges they're having. And they may be very simple. Some of them might be as simple as running water, so put in a borehole, or regular access to cheap products, whether it's rice or medical services. Now, we don't go in there guns blazing and assuming that we can resolve all their problems, but we make them know for a fact that we're in it for a long-term investment, and as far as we're concerned, their well-being is our well-being. Coming to Europe for us is just an opportunity for us to voice out exactly what we're doing, and we've set our mind to reaching out across whatever platforms we can. And the reason why we have our footprints in different parts of the world is so that we can engage different parties, give some valuable information to potential investors, and also look at opportunities that we may be able to use to help develop our business strategies. Turns out that some of our off-takers are actually based here in Europe. For us, it's important that they understand that we expect a bilateral sort of relationship, so that at some point or the other, we can look back and say, well, we might be processing the product here in Europe and using it to produce steel and all that, but there's a need for it back in your home country, in which case we don't mind the reverse engineering and investing locally in those markets as well, and sharing again in the local profits. And that's, to us, is really the benefit here, because if you're simply exploiting a mineral, then we're not necessarily doing anything different than what we've seen in the past, and has ended up really have been no benefit to the indigenous owners. We also have a charitable foundation, which is really where we push our awareness. We try as much as possible to be low-key. One, for the fact that we're a small organization doing pretty big things. Our foundation reaches out to various communities. We obviously do fundraising events, and all of this goes back into the communities that we're actually active in. The key thing that we like people to take away is that Africa, and specifically in this case Nigeria, is open for business, specifically to the mining sector. I mean, the current administration has done some very significant work in ensuring it's a favorable environment. We're smack bang in the middle of it, so anyone who's interested in looking at opportunities in the market or sharing in some sort of venture, come talk to us.